You got Mac and Mac here on Birds 365, and we've got John Stolnis from Bleeding Green Nation in the Eye on the Enemy podcast here to talk Birds with us before this all-important. All right, no, it's not. Game against the Cleveland Browns tonight down at the link. Johnny, yes, I was just complaining, whining, bitching, moaning. Say whatever you want about the fact that they're going to charge you to go in tonight. And John continues to tell me really doesn't mean anything as to who's going to make the roster. Very little, 3-4 spots at the back end of the roster. Is Nick Sirianni going to try and get anything out of this game tonight? We're just debating Nakobe Dean, and John thinks they won't play him. They already know how good he's going to be. I like to think I know how good he's going to be, but I'd actually like to see it. We going to see Nakobe tonight?
You know, I don't know. It sounds like not. I think they think that the joint practices that they have are actually more valuable than the preseason games. And I think they probably saw as much as they felt like they needed to see. I mean, because Deshaun Watson's not going to play for Cleveland. And so you really got to see what these guys could do against the Browns' first-string offensive line and Deshaun Watson and all that. So I don't think so. I think what you're looking for here is you're going to see who the backups are going to be, who the third-string guys are going to be. You're looking to see who can make an impact on special teams. Maybe somebody can jump up, maybe somebody that you can use as trade bait later in the year or whatever. And that's not as big a deal in the NFL, but you know, there's other things that they can find out. But if he does play, it's not going to be for much and for very long. And I don't think he's going to play against starters. So I don't see the utility in it necessarily. So they really just need to get rid of preseason games. I mean, what are we doing with preseason
I'm with
games
you,
here?
John.
It's a total farce. Why are we doing this?
Money. That's it. I mean, they dress it up. They charge the same for parking, concessions. They bundle it in with season tickets. I hate to say it, but they're just picking people's pockets at this stage.
You know what it's good for? It's good for young kids to go to the preseason games. Like if you don't want to take your kid to the intensity, like a little kid, like an 8-9-year-old to the intensity of an NFL game, it's the perfect thing to take them to.
Yeah. That's true. You don't have as many F-bombs, so
that's right. The fight ratio is way less at a preseason game.
You feel comfortable without the passion because nobody's getting too passionate about a preseason game. So I'll agree with you there. And you know what? It would be better if they lowered the prices for that reason, because these things are expensive to attend.
Yeah. And
you know, some people can't afford it. And if you say, you know what, these games are meaningless, let's charge $10, blah, 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 and you allow more people or more people that maybe can't get season tickets or maybe go to a regular season game, I would applaud it, but that's not what they do. They act like it's a regular season game from a price standpoint, and that's egregious from the NFL's perspective for what this has turned into. Because you're right, the coaching staff doesn't value these things. They value the joint practices. And I'm not going to say they don't completely value, because they want to see the lower end of the roster and they want to see these guys in live environments and try to pick the diamond in the rough. But from a fan perspective, it's terrible. It really is.
I'm wondering if it's not even more instructive for the Eagles, for the coaching staff, right? To see, well, you don't have your best guys in there. So Brian Johnson is not using the same playbook that he will use for the regular season, but at least gets him into the practice and the habit of the tempo of calling plays in an NFL game before he has to do it. That's really the only utility that I can see is for these new coordinators to kind of get into the flow of making the decisions, making the calls in an NFL game.
The other day, John, you probably don't know this. I did the morning show on WIP, and we had Sean Desai on as a guest at 7:00 in the morning. I thank him for coming over to our camper to do a spot at 7 a.m., which was great. But he didn't answer one question. He dodged every single question. So my final question was, I got to ask a question he's going to give an answer to. I said, well, where are you going to do your coaching from? The field or the bench? Field of the booth. And he said, I haven't decided yet. Yeah. Even something like that, he hadn't made up his mind yet. Refused to answer any of the questions we asked. He was very good at giving an answer while giving a non-answer. But so you're right about the coaching. They're still deciding whether they're going to be on the field or in the booth.
I would say I don't think they are. He just doesn't want to answer anything. I think he knows where he's going to be. He just doesn't want to answer. You know, that's one of the things
what does tipping your hand on that? Well, if we're always talking about competitive advantage, Ooh, he's going to be on the sidelines. Ooh, he's going to be in the booth. How is an opponent going to get a competitive
They're
advantage?
not, but that's how ingrained it is in them. How does it benefit?
Sean Desai just got here 20 minutes ago. How did it get ingrained that fast?
Because one thing you'll notice about, even with Shane said nothing here. And Shane Steichen I'm talking about, and he'll be back next week. And I'm looking forward to that. He is a completely different guy off that podium. Completely different guy. Very open, willing to say things off the record for that reason. But he knows he had a head coach that's got his fingerprints on everything. And he doesn't want to say something out of school that the head coach doesn't want. Nick Sirianni makes sure these guys don't say anything. Anything. Like, why does Nick think it's a competitive advantage not to let us know, oh, the starters aren't playing in Baltimore in the first preseason game? Oh, I don't know, Jody, but that's where we are. And he's not the only one with these new school coaches. They think everything is, oh, you can't tell him this, you can't tell him, don't let him have this, don't let him have that. That's kind of he wants his guys to say absolutely nothing. I hate it. I don't agree with it, but it is what it is. And Sean Desai's a smart guy. He picks that up in 5 minutes. He doesn't need 10 minutes. And that's why he acts the way he acts. But John, do you take it in a different way?
No, I think it's silly in a lot of cases, especially during the preseason, and specifically with whether or not Sean's going to be in the booth or whether he's going to be on the field. I mean, listen, maybe we're playing checkers and he's got some three-dimensional chess game going on in his mind that I can't pick up on, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of utility into being as secretive as he is, especially about.
And he's been a coordinator before. It's only one he's gotten. He knows what he wants to do.
Yeah.
But, it's like, all right, I'm not supposed to say anything. And the minute you say, well, this is not important, I can say that, then all of a sudden you slip up and you give up something. So that's how I would expect.
Like a zero tolerance policy kind of a thing from Nick Sirianni.
Yeah. He doesn't want anything out there, which is absurd. I'll agree with that. But he's not the only young coach. I will say that.
Assuming Nakobe Dean is not playing tonight, but he's locked in as the middle linebacker, and the Eagles know better than we do as to what he's going to be able to do when that first snap comes in New England. All right, we'll put that aside. That's a given, even though it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
The rest of the linebackers. Zach Cunningham's been better than Miles Jack to this point. Nicholas Morrow played well enough last week. It didn't wow, but the best of the lot. Christian Ellis was the darling of OTAs and got a pick the first day of camp. Ooh, Christian Ellis is going to compete for that starting spot. There's a whole bunch of guys that look okay, that have different strengths and different weaknesses. How are they going to determine who's going to be the other starter out there week one with Nakobe Dean?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think based on all the reporting that we saw about the Browns joint practices, I kept seeing Cunningham's name pop up over and over again, deflecting passes, being in the middle of things, and that seems to me to be one of the ways that they're going to figure this out is who's making plays here in these joint practice sessions. And if they play in the preseason games, I guess they'll use some of that as well. But in these practices, and that's the name I hear most. I don't hear Miles Jack mentioned all that much. I don't hear Nicholas Morrow mentioned all that much. If Morrow's making a lot of plays in these preseason games, that's great. But if they value the joint practices more and he's not doing quite as much as somebody like Zach Cunningham, then he probably, even though we are seeing Morrow play better, it's a lot of the stuff that we're not seeing that they're probably going to make their decisions on. And so, I think that's the thing with the preseason now is it's not for us, right? I mean, it's not, that's why it's a little bit disconcerting, is because back in the day, we used to, the first team players would get the first quarter in the first preseason game, and then they might get the first half in the second preseason game. They might play into the third quarter in the third, and then they take the fourth off. And we could see how they looked, how everybody was progressing. And it was kind of comforting for us to kind of get a sense of where is this team as we're moving through the summer, as we're getting closer to week one. And we just don't have any sense of that right now. And so we want these preseason games to do that for us, to see Nicholas Morrow playing, and we realize that, you know, they're second and third stringers, nobody of any consequences playing in these games. And so I think the way they're going to determine this, it's going to be completely out of our eyesight. It's going to be on the practice field. It's going to be in these joint practices. And Zach Cunningham is the name that keeps popping up from what I can see.
Yeah, he played very well. He's very long. He got his, as you mentioned, Reed Blankenship intercepted Deshaun Watson 3 times over the 2 practices. 2 of them were because of tip balls by Zach Cunningham. So, when you start making plays like that in big reps in those types of situations, it's probably time to take notice. And I'll be interested to see how he plays tonight. But one of the things in Baltimore, John, was Eli Ricks. And I got so many fans saying, oh, Eli Ricks is going to make the team because he's got the high profile, you know, rep from college, 5-star recruits, going to LSU, Alabama, and everybody's like, and I was like, be careful, you know. He's doing that against Anthony Brown, who I think, you know, sent a snail mail package to him to say, hey, I'm going to put this on a platter for you. 4th string quarterback. And he's got about 3 guys he's got to jump over on top of that. When guys do make plays in these preseason games, you got to look at that context and how it relates, and the fact that when you brought up a good point with Nakobe, like if he does start, he's playing against a 3rd string quarterback. He'll probably play 8 reps and then get the heck out of there. What's the point? You just sold me, John. What's the point?
Yeah, no, I don't really get it either. I mean, I think with a guy like Eli Ricks, who's an undrafted free agent, he comes in here and he's like 4th on the depth chart or 3rd on the depth chart from what I see. And they have other guys they like. They like Zach McPherson. They like Josh Jobe. You know, there's other guys on this team that they like. I don't know if Greedy Williams, who they signed, is going to end up making the team. Probably not. But but he's a guy who's played at the NFL level before, and so
Kelly Ringo has got to make the team.
Yeah. So, and maybe he gets a special team spot by his performance here in the preseason. But that's kind of what we're looking at, you know. I mean, that's the point of the preseason anymore. I think is just it gets you more. You're looking at more developmental guys. You know, who do we want to keep around on a practice squad this year? You know, who do we have that we can maybe move to another team for somebody on their practice squad? And you know, maybe if Eli Ricks does some really special things in these next few games.
Well, here's where Jody brought this up real quick, John.
Yeah.
Jody made a good point. You don't want him making plays in the preseason because you don't want somebody else seeing it. Yeah. One of these cornerback deficient teams who go, wow, that kid's got some talent. Let's take a shot. Let's pick him up on waivers. So it's almost counterproductive because you want to get the kid on the practice squad.
Yeah.
It's crazy at this point.
Yeah. So I don't really know what they do, and I gotta believe the coaching staff is just as annoyed by these preseason games as we are. Because it's a shell game. It's a total shell game. It's bizarre, and I don't know as a fan how to approach them anymore. I don't know what to look for. I don't know what to watch for with these preseason games. I'm as lost as everybody else.
And there are some positions where you don't have questions. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Lane Johnson is pretty locked in at right tackle. So you can take that off the board. But there's a whole bunch of positions that are, at least in my mind, your mind, John's mind, Eagle fans' minds, undecided. Yeah. So now you have to play the mind game of, well, what is the coach thinking? Does he still need to evaluate? Is he debating between 2 players? Are they protecting a guy because of injury? Are they protecting, as John just pointed out, a guy who you don't want another team to get a look at because they might snatch him off your roster if you try and sneak him through to the practice squad? If you're watching tonight's game and the difference between joint practices and exhibition games, because there's a difference in the way the coaches evaluate the 2, how do you watch tonight? Do you not even care? Just root for the laundry, go Eagles go, and not try and think about what a play actually means in a guy's playing time, whether he's going to be on the team or not? How do you handle it all if you're a fan tonight, John?
I think if you're a fan who's kind of clued into further down the roster, you can look at reps, right? Who's like, it was interesting that Kenny Gainwell didn't even suit for the first game. It tells you a little bit about, I think, how they think about Kenny Gainwell and the fact that they feel like they know what they have there. So maybe that leads you to think that in the back of their minds, he's kind of, if there is a 1A, that it might be Kenny Gainwell. So what does that look like tonight? Does Kenny play tonight and do one of the other, like Rashad Penny got a lot of attempts last week. Does he get the night off tonight? Like, how they gonna, is it kind of like like a starting rotation in baseball? Like this guy's gonna be your starter here for game 2. And then for the third game, you're gonna have somebody else as kind of the guy who gets most of the looks. I think that's basically just kind of what you're looking at. Like who is, I think you can get a judge of who's ahead of who on their depth chart, not necessarily what we might see online based on who's getting the most snaps. And it's not necessarily the guy who's getting more snaps is ahead on the depth chart. If you see a player get less time in these preseason games, that should probably tell you that they are ahead of the other players on the depth chart, which is counterintuitive.
Very much so.
The preseason is an exercise in counterintuitivity. Is that a word I made up? I think I made up a word.
I love to make up words here on Bird 365.
I made one up yesterday. What did I do?
We do it all the time.
Yeah. I made one up yesterday. It was phenomenal. Ed Kratz called me out on it. So was that yesterday? Anyway, earlier this week. Yeah. But we do it all the time, John. One part I think is relevant, and that part is special teams. And I argued, I was just talking about Ricks. Mekhi Gardner has looked better in practice than Eli Ricks. And he made a big play on special teams. And I asked Jody and our guest at the time, and I'll ask you, what's more important, making that play on special teams where you might be relevant, where you can make an impact on the 53-man roster, or getting the pick 6 in a meaningless situation in the fourth quarter? And that's why I'm interested in guys like Gardner and also Tyree Cleveland, who played well as a receiver and seems to have developed a sort of rapport with Marcus Mariota in that second unit. So he was good as a receiver, but he's also a good special teams player. And the third point, John, is the Eagles lost Sean Bradley. So they need some help on special teams. It's boring, but is it more important to stand out on that third base than, second half of a preseason game, offense, defense?
Yeah, if your goal is to make this team this year, and you're not getting if you're a cornerback and you're not going to start, you need to perform well in special teams, and that's how you really need to make your mark. You need to put that on tape for the coaches to see. I think one of the things that can help your case, even if you are a player who's further down on the depth chart, whose future this year might only be on special teams, you can open some eyes and they might decide to keep you around, even if you maybe don't perform as well on special teams. If you do something special on the field, like you mentioned, get a pick 6. Well, if somebody tips a pick 6 in the air and you snatch it and there's nobody in front of you and you run it into the end zone, I don't think the coaching staff is going to look at that and be like, oh, wow, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
But if they see you diagnose a play, if they see you, if a quarterback's kind of looking in one direction, then comes across the field and you diagnose that and you jump the route and you go and you get a pick 6, that's a whole different thing. So I think the coaching staff can look at those kinds of plays and see, okay, this is a smart player. This is somebody who recognized what was coming, made a play on the ball, brought the ball in, which is, again, we've seen cornerbacks on this team with boxing gloves for hands who just can't haul anything in. If you make a play, score a touchdown, and you do it in a way where you're like, okay, then I think that the play on the field outside of special teams can really matter. But for these guys who are either going to be on the practice squad or just struggling to make the team playing only special teams, you're right. That's, honest to goodness, punt coverage is really going to be one of the more fascinating aspects, which is just, it's difficult to comprehend, but that's what we're really looking at here in these preseason games.
Hopefully they can force the Browns to do a bunch of punts tonight so they get time to evaluate that. John Stolnis here with us on Birds 365. All right, here's an kind of seems irrelevant, but it's not a question. I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball.
All right.
Assuming Jason Kelce doesn't play a down tonight, I think that's a pretty good assumption. How many different Eagles will fill in at center tonight? because John and I have been going back and debating on what do they do when Kelsey gets hurt? Do they move Jurgens back to center when he's won the right? Oh, by the way, John, has Nick officially acknowledged that Jurgens is the starting right guard?
No, he doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to. He's not going to do that till 5 minutes before kickoff against the Patriots. Assuming Jurgens doesn't play center tonight, he's going to be right guard, or he might not even play. They might go the deference route with him to protect his ass so he doesn't take any snaps. How many different guys are going to be quote-unquote backup centers for the Eagles and play snaps tonight at center?
Yeah, I'm just kind of I'm looking at the depth chart, and so Brett Toth, I think, is a guy we'll probably see. He might get the most snaps tonight. They've got Cameron Tom and Josh Andrews listed as third and fourth string centers here, and we know Cam Jurgens is that guy. I think I don't know what other members of the offensive line can kind of swing. Did Landon Dickerson play some center in college? Or he was
he was great. He was an All-American center.
Right,
He's
right.
never getting in tonight's game.
No.
He's not getting in tonight's game.
But if we're just thinking about backup center possibilities and kind of down the road, I mean, I don't think he's a Pro Bowl left guard. You're not moving him off of that spot. But if we're talking about emergency situations here, I mean, that would have to be a pretty darn big emergency. But I think tonight that's kind of get a heavy dose of Toth and get a heavy dose of Tom and Andrews, and I don't know, maybe there's some undrafted folks, maybe there's some other guys somewhere on this roster who knows how to snap a ball who might get some time. But I certainly wouldn't. I don't know that I'm necessarily Jason Kelsey's obviously not seeing the field, but I don't know that I'm starting anybody of consequence at center tonight either.
It's funny you bring up Landon like that because he was, as I said, he was a first team All-American center at Alabama his final season. He won the Remington Trophy as the best center in the country. And I was thinking about Kelsey, Isaac Seumalo is going into his I think 8th or 9th season, and he was the first heir apparent for Jason Kelsey. They drafted Isaac Seumalo to be the center after Jason Kelsey. He's now entering his 9th season. Then they drafted Dickerson to be the heir apparent, and now he's a Pro Bowl left guard. And then they drafted Jurgens to be the heir apparent. Now he's moving the right guard. Who knows? Maybe he turns into a great player, and they say, we're not moving him, and maybe there's another one.
Hey, the 2028 draft, I think that's our spot to draft Jason Kelsey's backup.
That's the sweet spot, 2028. Exactly right, Johnny. Yes.
But I do think it'll eventually be Cam. He'll be the official heir apparent. But I'm through saying this is Jason's last year. But it is an interesting conversation because Jeff Stoutland doesn't like moving parts. But one of my low-key concerns about this Eagles team, John, is the lack of depth on the offensive line. We saw it at the end in Doug Peterson's last year. Lane Johnson had to go the reconstructive ankle surgery route, missed a bunch of games. They had other injuries on the offensive line, completely fell apart. It happened the end of Andy Reid's era. Offensive line got a bunch of injuries, completely fell apart. They lose Isaac, we know is a good player. People, Andre Dillard didn't live up to the hype, but that's a really good backup player. You can't go forward. He got $10 million from Tennessee, essentially. You can't go forward with it. I'm not arguing with it, but if they suffer 2 key injuries, and Landon Dickerson already got hurt, he was out of practice. He's got the long-term injury issues as well from college, the 2 ACLs. Low-key concern. Jack Driscoll, solid player, but we've already seen what happens. No, but you can't replace players like Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey. Any concerns over the depth on the offensive line, or we just assume, Stoutland will get him ready?
I think there's mostly a feeling of Stoutland will get them ready. Although we know this team's record without Lane Johnson.
Yeah,
There's
not good.
really, but I mean, I don't know if they'd gone out. I don't know who they could go out and get during the course of an offseason as a backup to Lane Johnson who can do what Lane Johnson does and you not suffer some kind of big drop off. I think Jack Driscoll, you're right. He's nowhere close to Lane Johnson, but he's a solid backup. I think he can back up right tackle and left tackle. So if Mailata misses more time, you can play him at either spot, and he's going to do okay there. He's not going to pave the road for you. And he's not an impenetrable force to keep edge rushers from getting to the quarterback, but he's fine there. Sua Opeta has played pretty well when called upon to do it. And I think it'd be interesting to see if Dennis Kelly gets a whole lot of playing time tonight and what he looks like, because I think they're concerned about their offensive line depth. That's one of the reasons why they brought him back. I don't know how much
And
he has
Josh
left in the tank.
Andrews. Yeah,
Right.
you can see him bringing in veteran guys because they're concerned.
Right.
They see that concern.
And I think that's a legitimate concern. I think that even losing Andre Dillard, I still think the Eagles probably have more depth along the offensive line than most teams do. So comparatively speaking to last year and previous Eagles teams, I think you're right. There's a little bit of a reason to be concerned, but I think the Eagles are better prepared than most teams, the vast majority of teams, to deal with an injury to their right tackle or their left tackle than most other teams. And I think Tyler Steen's development this year, how he plays as a rookie, will be important. He's probably not. I don't think you can slide him at right or left tackle, but if you can have him as a backup at guard and not have to worry about moving Driscoll to one of those spots, and you have an injury at tackle, then you can use Driscoll at tackle. So I think getting Tyler Steen, I think, could be a low key, really good move for their depth here in 2023, depending on how ready he is to play significant snaps.
All right, John, I would love to either give you credit or say shame on you, but I don't honestly remember which camp you were in. Were you one of those guys who, when he came out for his first practice, took a look at DeVonta Smith's legs and said, wow, how can he play in the National Football League with those twigs for legs?
Oh, I was. I'm in
yesterday,
that
Darius Slay said, here's his limit. Numero uno. Best wide receiver in the National Football League. Not one of, not top five, the number one wide receiver in the National Football League. I hope he wasn't standing next to A.J. Brown when he said that.
Yeah.
But he did say he thought he could be the best wide receiver in the National Football League. Is DeVonta Smith ceiling that high, John Stolnis?
I don't see it. I mean, I love DeVonta Smith. I think he's tremendous, and he got better last year. So there's no reason to think he can't get better this year. I don't know that he has the physicality to be the best. I mean, that's saying something. There are some phenomenal receivers in this league. He's not better than A.J. Brown right now. No, you're right.
He's not the best receiver on his own team. Come on.
And so he's not better than Justin Jefferson right now. And there's a number of other receivers who I think are ahead of DeVonta Smith. Now, can he become such an elite route runner that he can run any route on the field and get open? Because he does catch everything. He very rarely drops anything. Yes. And so I think he can be a top 5 receiver in this league. I think that's his ceiling. I just don't see him getting to the point where he's the best receiver in the NFL. But I love the hyperbole, man. I love you. Man. Get your man up there.
It's funny Jody brings that up because I'm with you. I love DeVonta Smith as a player. But, I mean, come on. He's not in that conversation. He's a very good player. Very good player.
Like I said, I'm glad that Slay wasn't standing next to AJ Brown.
Well, that's what I was about.
Be thankful you're not standing next to Darius Slay. That you're just flat out telling him he's wrong.
Well, no, I'll tell Slay he's wrong to his face. What people don't know about Slay, and it's funny because I tweeted this last night. He is a phenomenal leader. He just defends it. Some Eagles fan was taking a shot at Javon Hargrave last night, because he's gone. And they'll say, well, he couldn't stop the run, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And Slay jumps in and says, Hargrave's a dog. Hargrave's great. He does the same thing with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Darius Slay defends his teammates to the death. That's why everyone loves him. If you ask him about Lane Johnson, he'll say he's the best right tackle in football. He'd be right, by the way. If you ask him about Jason Kelce, he'd say he's the best center in football. He might be right. It's probably Creed Humphrey, but he's in the conversation. If you ask him about Dallas Goedert, he'd say he's the best tight end. He's not. It's Kelce or Kittle or Mark Andrews, but he's up there. That's just who he is. I mean, DeVonta Smith, is a great receiver, but he's not even the best receiver on his own team. And, the Jeffersons of the world, the Tyreek Hills of the world, the DeVonta Adams of the world, the Jamar Chases, those are the best receivers in football. And, AJ's probably about 5-ish, somewhere in that range. DeVonta's a very, very good receiver. But one of the things, and Jody, I've talked about this for a lot. AJ Brown was the final piece of the puzzle, man. Everybody fit into place, and that includes DeVonta. AJ Brown is that guy. He's the guy. He's the guy that's impossible to stop. If you got a good throw, the back shoulder. He and Jalen Hurts have been phenomenal with the back shoulder stuff. And I know, Jody, you're in the Hard Knocks right now. Did you see the clip? Did you see? I don't know if they put the show yet about the Jets. Ulbrich talking about Aaron Rodgers, the back shoulder stuff.
Yeah,
it's just he's in all of it. That's what it's looked like with Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown with the back shoulder. AJ's different, man. And DeVonta, nothing against him. He just doesn't have that physical presence to be that guy. It's not an insult, although people will take it as an insult. That's
I think DeVonta Smith, if he was the number one with like Quez Watkins as the 2, and it would just
we already saw that, John.
Yeah, and we saw the limitations of that in 2021. And so he is perfectly cast as 1B, right? I mean, he's perfectly cast as a guy on the other side of the field where you have a physical receiver on one side and AJ Brown and DeVonta Smith who can beat you long. He can beat you over the middle because he is such a good route runner, but he's not going to win those 50-50 balls most of the time. I mean, it's just he can't outmuscle the cornerbacks, but you can't help your physical makeup. Like it's just there's a limitation on guys who are kind of that thin and that slight of build as to how effective they can be. But he's unbelievably effective, and it's like you said, no slight on DeVonta Smith if we don't call him the best wide receiver in the NFL. You're right. He's a hype man. Darius Slay is a hype man for his players, and that's all that was.
Good for Darius Slay on that. And I'll tell you right now, it's not what's best for the Philadelphia Eagles, but I'd like to see DeVonta Smith as the number 1 wide receiver, because right now you're right, he's 1B. AJ is the number 1. AJ goes down for 5 games this year. DeVonta's going to have to step into that role as a third-year player with an MVP level quarterback, because 2021 he was a rook and Jalen Hurts was just becoming Jalen Hurts. So I'd like to see DeVonta now with Jalen Hurts at the level he's at and DeVonta at the level he's at as the number 1. Best thing to happen for the Eagles? No. He stays 1B all year and AJ takes every snap at the other side. But I just like to know that for my own edification.
Oh, and by the way, I think DeVonta would be much better than he was as a rookie. I do think
I'm trying to make. Thank you, John, for confirming that.
He would be much better in the role, but he wouldn't be as good as AJ Brown in the role. That's all I'm saying. And by the way, probably be a top 10 or top 15 receiver because he's that good. But just not the stratosphere. And I gave you the names: the Adams, Jefferson, Chase, Hill, AJ. I'm probably missing somebody, but those are the names off the top of my head. Those guys they're a different level. They're a different level. That's no slight. That's not a slight to DeVonta. DeVonta Smith is a tremendous player, and the fact that the Eagles, a team that, think about Carson Wentz setting, boy, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, setting the franchise record for passing yards. And I believe they didn't have a wide receiver, over 600 yards. This team was awful at wide receiver for years and years. And now they got AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith. They don't have to be 1-2. They're both great, but there are other great receivers in the NFL.
Agreed. And I hope for Eagles purposes, we don't have to debate this again, because AJ goes down and DeVonta comes in a 5-game period, goes for 700 and change and 9 touchdowns. Then we might, he might be the number 1. Slay might be right. The only way we're going to figure that out is if AJ goes down. All right. Tonight, the Eagles will win the coin toss and do what, John Stolnis? You could have knocked me over with a feather in preseason game 1 when they won the coin toss and said, yeah, we'll take the ball. Sirianni never takes the ball. Could take the ball again to that. What was the line of thinking behind that? I still haven't figured that out.
Well, the line of thinking on deferring is that you get the extra possession in the second
that I
half.
get. And I think it's so overstated and ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't want to re-legislate that. But the results are the results, and Sirianni always defers. Why do you think he took the football last week?
I think he wants to see his offense on the field more. I think he wants to see his offense get on the field. I think he wanted to see
bigger questions on defense than offense. Just overall, looking at the two sides of the ball of this team right now, don't we still need to learn more about the defense where they got 5 new starters as compared to the? Well, then again, because nobody plays on offense because nobody plays because they start. Maybe you're right. I apologize.
Kickoff, even something as goofy as kickoff coverage. Like nobody's taking fair catches in the preseason, which we all think they will in the regular season because everybody's trying to figure out the new kickoff rules and what can we do? What can we do? I think they wanted to look at that as well. Yeah, they don't care. But yeah, come week 1 in Foxborough, if they win the toss, they're deferring.
They're deferring.
Guarantee that.
Well, the Patriots better not come out and run the ball down their throats.
Yeah.
Like Mr. ESPN says the Pats are going to be able to do this year because Belichick said so.
That could be a concern. At John Stolnis, make sure you follow John on Twitter. Read him at Bleeding Green Nation. I'm going to give you my 5 bubble players, and I want you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Okay.
Hopefully verbally.
Yeah,
Trey Sermon.
Let's see. He's gotta beat out. I mean, how do you get him on the? I think he makes it. I think he's probably a special teams guy. He's shown a little bit here.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah, kickoff returner too. A little bit. Tyree Cleveland, guy I mentioned, showed up in Baltimore, has special teams sort of ability from his time in Denver. Tyree Cleveland, John Stolnis.
I think. Let's see. I say no. I think they've got so many guys at receiver. I think that Ngata has looked decent. Britton Covey's going to make the team as their punt returner. I don't know that they have space for him.
Guy we also mentioned, Dennis Kelly, veteran potential swing tackle.
We were just talking about offensive line depth. I feel like yes, he does, even though I don't really know. They signed him. We haven't heard anything from him. So I don't know if they like what they're seeing, but I'll say at the moment, because of the concerns on the depth chart, I think yes.
And I left the 2 toughest ones for last. The last player in my mind on the defensive front, the deepest defensive front in football, Moro Ajomo. The Eagles love to keep their draft picks, but he's a 7th rounder. They're going to try to get somebody through. It would be a 7th rounder.
I say no. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up on the practice squad at some point, but I don't think he makes the roster.
And finally, Justin Evans. Now, I think you're going to say no, but let me say this. In Justin Evans' case, Reed Blankenship has taken every first team rep, and they've rotated everybody next to him. And Terrell Edmonds has gotten the most. Kayvon Wallace next. Justin Evans. Sidney Brown has got the least. They seem to like the coverage ability of Justin Evans, plus special teams. Did they keep 5 safeties? Justin Evans.
It's a good question. I think it's, and they like cover guys, especially since there's a lot of uncertainty there. Kayvon Wallace, I know it sounded like during the Browns practices, he was really hitting and flying around.
Jimmy Haslam wanted to kill him. Jimmy Haslam all fired up.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say no, mainly because I think there are other positions where maybe they want to stash some guys, but I think Evans is interesting. and he can maybe change some minds. You talk about a guy who has a lot to play for here in the preseason. He's one of them. So if he makes some plays, maybe. But I would say at the
It's
moment,
the
no.
most difficult decision for me.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll add one more last question to John's list, but I'll give you an extra option.
All right.
Makes the team, gets cut, gets traded. Derek Barnett.
I don't know that there's a team out there that would want to trade for him. First of all, he hasn't done much, and he was out all last year.
John thinks he's going to merit a third day 3 pick if they put him on the market.
Yeah, you know what? I think that's probably more likely than him making the team. I think he makes the team. I think he makes the team. I don't love that. I would rather not soak up a roster spot there. But I don't think they cut him, and I don't think he gets traded. At least not right away. I would say Derek Barnett probably makes the team. He probably makes. Yeah, I think he probably makes it.
By process of elimination, he makes the team.
Yeah, I think so.
That is not the case when we punch up John Stolnis. No, we want John Stolnis.
He
We
made
asked
the
for John
team.
Stolnis. We beg for John Stolnis when he jumps aboard with us. You can read his stuff on bleedinggreennation.com and check out his Eye on the Enemy podcast. JS, always a pleasure. You know, we'll be getting you on plenty during the season, bud.
That's great. Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
John
Sean.
Stolnis here with us on Birds 365. All right, come back. Want to get into the weeds a little bit with Johnny Mac here about how to play the roster game, because we're only a couple of weeks away from it. John just asked about the bubble guys, who's on the bubble, who's making it, who's not going to make it. Let's zero in on the numbers a little bit. 53, who gets cut, get through waivers, bring guys back to the practice squad, elevation from the practice squad, protecting guys on the practice squad so they can't be picked off by another team. It's Howie Roseman's life for the next 3 weeks, let's be honest. We'll play along with Howie Roseman next here on Birds 365.